The city lights always seemed to flicker with a cold, distant brilliance whenever Haru looked at Elena. To him, she was a masterpiece he wasn't allowed to touch. He had spent 7 long years, from the hallways of high school to the lecture halls of college, orbiting her like a lonely moon around a frozen planet. Elena was the definition of unattainable grace, with sapphire eyes that looked through people rather than at them. Haru convinced himself her icy exterior was merely a challenge to be conquered with the sheer force of his adoration. He was a man possessed, blinded by the shine of a diamond that held no warmth to give. In the quiet periphery of his life stood Hana. She was the childhood friend who had seen him through every scraped knee and every shattered hope. If Elena was a distant star, Hana was the soft glow of a bedside lamp, constant and overlooked. They shared a history of playground dirt and teenage secrets. Hana knew the rhythm of Haru's heart better than he did himself. She noticed the way he neglected his own life whenever Elena threw a tiny crumb of attention his way, and it broke her heart in a way she could never voice. Haru's devotion was absolute self-destruction. He worked grueling night shifts at a noisy warehouse just to afford extravagant gifts, vintage perfumes and gold bracelets that cost more than his monthly rent. He even missed his own mother's birthday because Elena mentioned she needed someone to help her move a single sofa. He was a servant, believing his empty bank account was a fair price for a moment of her time. He lived on the desperate hope that one day she would finally see him as an equal rather than a convenient tool to be used. While Haru poured his soul into a void, Hana held the fragments of his reality together. She worked 2 jobs to secretly pay the utility bills Haru ignored. She'd bring him warm meals every evening, claiming she had made too much to ensure he didn't collapse from exhaustion. Yet Hana was hiding a dark shadow of her own. Her skin had become translucent, and a sharp, nagging pain often radiated through her chest. She spent her nights stifling coughs into a worn pillow, terrified that if Haru saw her weakness, he would have one more thing to worry about. The first sign of his folly came on Elena's 21st birthday. Haru spent his entire savings on a private dinner and a handcrafted music box. He waited outside her apartment for hours, his hands shaking with nervous anticipation. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The hours passed before a cold text finally arrived on his screen. Elena wasn't coming. She had decided to go to a yacht party with wealthy socialites who had better connections. She didn't apologize, she simply told him not to wait up and to go home. Heavy rain began to fall, drenching Haru as he sat on the curb, defeated. The music box played a tinny, mocking tune as the water ruined the delicate wood. He felt like a discarded toy in a world that didn't want him. Then the rain suddenly stopped hitting him. He looked up to see Hana standing over him, her yellow umbrella held high to protect him, while she remained exposed to the storm. She didn't say a word of reproach. She just offered a hand, her eyes filled with an aching sympathy that Haru was too numb to understand. As they walked home, Hana's hand trembled violently against his arm. She stopped, turning to him with desperate urgency, her breath shallow and ragged. She opened her mouth to finally tell him the truth about her failing health, her fingers clutching his sleeve as if he were her last lifeline. But right then, Haru's phone chimed with a loud alert. It was Elena. She was bored of the party and wanted him to pick her up immediately. Without a thought, Haru pulled away. Ignoring Hana's stumble, he didn't see her tears as he ran toward the street, chasing the wrong girl again. Haru believed he had finally won the prize he sought for 7 years. Elena allowed him to call himself her boyfriend, but the title was a hollow victory. He wasn't a partner, he was a logistical convenience. He spent his days running her errands and his nights waiting outside clubs where he wasn't invited. Elena would emerge, smelling of expensive cocktails and indifference, expecting him to drive her home without gratitude. Haru was physically and mentally drained, his spirit frayed. Yet, he wore his misery like a badge of honor, convinced this was the price of loving a goddess. He told himself her demands were tests of his character. He was a man drowning in shallow water, too focused on the surface to realize his feet no longer touched the ground. Amidst this chaotic devotion, the quiet presence that once anchored him began to fade. Hana stopped showing up with meals. Her texts became sparse and then ceased. Haru, blinded by his perceived triumph, told himself Hana was finally finding her own path. He felt a fleeting sense of relief, a selfish thought that he no longer had to feel guilty for neglecting her. He didn't notice the silence in the hallway of his building, or that the lights in Hana's window stayed dark. He didn't know that while he was chasing Elena's smiles, Hana was navigating the sterile corridors of a hospital. Her strength was waning every hour, yet she remained silent, refusing to be a burden on the man already carrying the weight of a false love. The illusion shattered at a gallery opening Elena forced him to attend. Haru stood awkwardly while Elena mingled with the elite. Stepping onto a balcony for air, he froze as he heard Elena's distinct laugh. She was talking to her friends about him. "Haru?" she chuckled, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's just a placeholder. He's so loyal. It makes my ex furious to see him following me around like a puppy. Once I get what I want, I'll drop him. He's useful for the bills, nothing more." Her friends erupted in laughter, their voices sharp and cruel in the night air. The words were shards of ice piercing his chest. Every sacrifice and ignored instinct rushed back as a wave of humiliation. Haru didn't confront her. The shame was too heavy. He simply turned and walked out. He wandered the city streets, the neon lights now mocking his stupidity. The perfect girl was a hollow shell, and he had been a fool to worship the void inside her. The weight of his blindness pressed down until he could barely breathe, the realization of his wasted years settling into his bones. The cold air seemed to crystallize his regret, biting into his skin like the harsh words he had just heard. Desperate for reality, he turned toward his only sanctuary, Hana's house. He needed her voice and her quiet understanding. But when he arrived at the familiar gate, his heart stopped. The flower beds were overgrown and dead. In the middle of the lawn stood a for sale sign, cold and final. The house was empty. Hana was gone without a trace. Panic seized him. He ran to the old oak tree where they had built a treehouse. Climbing the ladder, he found a small wooden box. Inside was an envelope addressed to him in Hana's handwriting. He opened it with trembling fingers. The letter revealed the treatments and the terminal diagnosis she had been fighting alone. She didn't blame him. She only wished she had more time to see him happy. The ink was blurred, as if her own tears had marked the page. Haru sat in the dark, the letter clutched to his chest. The only person who ever truly loved him was slipping away. He had traded gold for glitter, and now, as the truth of her illness sank in, he was lost. He had no idea where she was, only that time was a luxury he no longer possessed. Haru didn't wait for the sun to rise or for his trembling legs to steady. He spent the entire night driving from one medical facility to another, his eyes bloodshot and his heart hammering against his ribs like a panicked bird. Every receptionist he encountered saw the same look of raw desperation on his face. A man realizing his world was ending not with a grand explosion, but with a silent, graceful departure. He shouted her name in lobbies and whispered it in sterile corridors, fueled by a frantic, sickening guilt. He had spent 7 years memorizing the curve of Elena's cold smile, yet he realized with a jolt of horror that he couldn't remember the last time he had truly looked into Hana's eyes without asking her for something. The city lights now seemed like mocking eyes, watching him fail the only person who stayed. He finally found her in a quiet hospice ward on the outskirts of the city, where the air felt heavy with the weight of unspoken goodbyes. The room smelled of antiseptic and fading white lilies. When he pushed the door open, the sight of her nearly shattered his resolve to stay strong. Hana was a fragile shadow of the vibrant girl who had once held an umbrella over him in the rain. She was pale, her breathing supported by rhythmic machines, her small frame almost lost beneath the heavy white sheets. But when her eyes fluttered open and landed on him, there was no anger or resentment. Instead, a weak smile touched her lips as she reached out a trembling hand, having waited for this moment. Haru fell to his knees by her bedside, his forehead resting against the cold metal rail as he sobbed into the coarse fabric of the mattress. The words he should have said years ago poured out in a broken, incoherent torrent. He apologized for every ignored text, every missed meal, and every time he had chosen a hollow idol like Elena over a living, breathing soul like her. He told her that he finally saw her, not just as his childhood friend or his safety net, but as the very rhythm of his heart and the anchor of his existence. He confessed his love, a realization that arrived too late to be a beginning, but just in time to be a final desperate truth. The doctors allowed them one final bittersweet afternoon in the hospital garden. Haru pushed her wheelchair through rows of blooming flowers, the scent of spring mocking the winter settling in his soul. They didn't talk about Elena's betrayal or the years of neglect. They talked about the old treehouse, the taste of stolen summer peaches, and the way the sun looked through the cherry blossom petals. For a few precious hours, the world was small, quiet, and perfect. But that night, as the moon hung low and heavy over the city, Hana's breathing slowed to a soft whisper. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, her hand still resting warmly in Haru's. She left him one final gift, a diary she had kept since middle school. In its pages, she had documented every moment she fell in love with him, from the day he shared his lunch in kindergarten to the night he stood in the rain, oblivious that his true home stood right beside him. Years passed, and the broken man who once chased empty shadows became a man who built a life of quiet kindness. Haru lived in Hana's gentle honor, helping those who felt invisible and forgotten. He stood by the same cherry blossom tree where they had played as children, the wind catching the petals just as it had back then. He understood now that the greatest tragedy wasn't just losing love. It was the haunting realization that he had possessed everything he ever needed for a decade. Yet he had been too busy looking at the horizon to notice the sun was already shining brightly on his face.